In the Miller household, love was never spoken about. It was measured. Measured in applause. Measured in attention. Measured in who got the last piece of cake. And most of all, measured in who got to sit at the center of the table. Leo always sat at the center. Elias sat near the kitchen door. Close enough to hear the conversation. Far enough to understand he wasn't part of it. Leo Miller had been born perfect. At least, that's how his parents told it. Markus Miller liked to say the story to anyone who visited. He came out kicking like a champion. Markus would laugh, clapping Leo on the back. I knew right then, this boy's going places. Leo grew up believing that. Because everyone told him. Teachers praised him. Neighbors admired him. His mother Sarah framed every certificate he ever brought home. Soccer trophies covered the living room mantel like golden soldiers guarding a shrine. But the shrine had only one god. Leo. And every shrine needs someone to dust it. That someone was Elias. Elias was born 3 years after Leo. No dramatic story. No proud speeches. Markus once joked at a barbecue. We figured Leo might need someone to pass him the ball. Everyone laughed. Elias laughed too. He was 7 at the time. He didn't understand yet that jokes sometimes hide truth. Dinner in the Miller household was like attending a ceremony. Markus sat at the head of the table. Leo at his right. Sarah across from them. Elias near the edge, where the kitchen light spilled onto his plate. The conversation always began the same way. So Leo, Markus would say proudly, how was practice today? Leo leaned back in his chair, confident. Coach says scouts might come next season. Markus slapped the table in excitement. That's my boy. Sarah beamed like the sun had risen just for him. Then Markus might glance briefly toward Elias. And you? The question was never real curiosity. It was a pause between Leo's achievements. School was fine, Elias would mumble. Good, Markus would say quickly. Pass the bread. The moment ended. Like a door quietly closing. Markus Miller believed in something he called building character. But somehow that philosophy only applied to one child. Elias. At 12 years old, Elias learned how to fix a leaking roof. At 13, he learned how to crawl beneath the house to clear mold from the crawl space. At 14, he was hauling scrap metal at a yard owned by Markus's friend. Markus always said the same thing. A boy becomes a man through work. But Leo never worked. Leo practiced soccer. Leo studied with private tutors. Leo rested for games. Markus explained it simply. Leo has talent. We can't waste it. Elias nodded every time. Because even then, he understood something painful. His dreams were considered replaceable. Leo's were an investment. The scrap yard smelled like rust and gasoline. It was loud. Heavy machines grinding metal. Men shouting over engines. Elias was 16 when Markus first brought him there. You'll work after school, Markus said. Good money. Elias nodded. What about homework? You'll figure it out. The owner, Mr. Thorne, looked Elias over like he was inspecting cheap equipment. Kid looks thin. He's tougher than he looks, Markus said. Then Markus leaned closer to Thorne. They whispered something Elias couldn't hear. But he noticed something strange. Mr. Thorne handed Markus a small envelope. Markus slipped it into his pocket. Elias didn't ask about it. Children learn quickly which questions bring trouble. Elias loved art. It was the one place where he didn't feel invisible. When he painted, the world slowed down. Colors listened when people didn't. He spent 3 weeks secretly working on a painting. A portrait of his mother. Not the tired woman who rushed through the house cooking and cleaning. But the version he remembered from childhood. The one who smiled while reading him bedtime stories. The painting captured that softness. When he finished it, Elias felt something unfamiliar. Pride. He carried it carefully into the living room. Mom? Sarah was sewing Leo's football jersey. A patch had torn during practice. What is it, Elias? I made something. He held up the painting. For a brief second, Sarah looked at it. That's nice, honey. Her eyes returned immediately to the jersey. "Could you finish the laundry though? Leo needs his kit for scouts tomorrow." Elias stood there quietly, his arms still holding the painting. After a moment he nodded. "Okay." He went upstairs and placed the painting under his bed. That night he realized something that changed him forever. Leo was the dream. Elias was the maintenance crew required to keep the dream running. The next day the house buzzed with excitement. Leo's big game. Scouts from 2 colleges were attending. Markus grilled steaks. Sarah cleaned the house twice. Elias spent the morning mowing the lawn, the afternoon washing Leo's car, the evening scrubbing the kitchen. When Leo finally left for the game, Markus pointed at Elias. "You better watch your brother. Learn something." Elias did watch. From the stands. He cheered louder than anyone. Because despite everything, he loved his brother. And maybe, just maybe, he hoped Leo might one day notice. Leo scored 2 goals. The crowd erupted. Markus hugged strangers. Sarah cried with joy. Elias clapped until his hands hurt. But when the family photo was taken afterward, no one called him over. That night Elias walked through the hallway toward his room. He heard voices in the living room. His parents. "Leo could go pro," Markus said proudly. Sarah laughed softly. "His extraordinary." Markus's voice lowered. "What about Elias?" There was a pause. Then Sarah said quietly, "He's a good boy." Markus sighed. "But he's not special like Leo." The words slipped through the hallway like cold wind. Elias stood frozen in the dark. Something inside him cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to change everything. From that night on, Elias stopped trying to be noticed. He became what they already believed he was. A ghost in the hallway. Years passed. The gap between the brothers grew wider. Leo became the star. Elias became the worker. But inside his mind, a single sentence formed slowly over time. A sentence he never said out loud. A sentence that carried every unshed tear. Every ignored achievement. Every quiet disappointment. It would one day echo through his life like a haunting. But for now, it lived only inside his heart. Waiting. "I tried my best, but I was never the child you were proud of." Years passed in the Miller household, but the roles never changed. Leo remained the pride of the family. Elias remained the quiet machinery that kept life running. The strange thing about favoritism is that it rarely announces itself. There are no declarations. No rules written on paper. Just 1,000 tiny moments where one child is lifted higher, and the other slowly disappears beneath the weight of being unnoticed. By the time Elias turned 18, he had already learned the most painful lesson a child can learn. Sometimes love in a family isn't equal. Sometimes it isn't even fair. The summer before Leo left for university felt like a celebration that never ended. Relatives visited constantly. Neighbors stopped by with gifts. Markus spoke proudly about Leo's acceptance into one of the top law schools in the state. "My son is going to be a lawyer," he would say, his chest swelling with pride. Sarah began planning Leo's future apartment. New furniture. New clothes. New beginnings. Meanwhile, Elias spent that same summer working 12-hour shifts at the scrapyard. Markus said it was temporary. Just until you figure out your direction. But Elias had already figured something out. His direction didn't matter. Leo's did. The night before Leo left for college, the Millers held a family dinner. A big one. The table overflowed with food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, desserts that Sarah had spent all afternoon baking. Friends and relatives filled the house with laughter. Leo sat in the center of it all like a king preparing to leave his kingdom. Everyone asked him questions. What kind of law will you study? Corporate? Criminal? Maybe politics someday. Markus lifted his glass. To my son Leo, the first lawyer in the Miller family. The room erupted with applause. Elias clapped too. But no one noticed that he had spent the entire evening in the kitchen washing dishes. When the party ended, Markus walked Leo to the car. Elias stood by the door watching. Leo hugged his parents tightly. Then he turned to Elias. "Take care of things here, all right?" Elias nodded. "I will." Leo smiled. "Good." Then he left. And the house became quieter. But the silence didn't bring peace. It only made the imbalance louder. Without Leo around, Markus began expecting more from Elias. More hours at the scrapyard. More work around the house. More responsibility. Markus called it preparation for adulthood. Elias called it survival. At 19, he worked mornings at a warehouse. Afternoons at the scrapyard. Evenings fixing things around the house. But Markus had added a new rule. "You live here," Markus said one night, leaning back in his chair. "You pay rent." Elias stared at him. "Rent?" "Nothing major," Markus said casually. "Just helping the family." The amount Markus demanded took nearly half of Elias's paycheck. But Elias didn't argue. He had learned long ago that arguing never changed anything. Despite the exhausting schedule, Elias enrolled in community college. He studied at night. Sometimes until sunrise. Numbers fascinated him. They didn't lie. They didn't ignore you. They either balanced, or they didn't. Over time, Elias discovered something unexpected. He was good at it. Very good. One of his professors noticed. "You should transfer to a university," the professor said. "You have real talent for financial analysis." Elias smiled politely. He knew that wasn't possible. But he kept studying anyway. 2 years later, he graduated from community college. It wasn't a grand ceremony. Just a small auditorium filled with families celebrating their children. Elias walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, and looked into the crowd. There were hundreds of people there. But not a single one had come for him. His parents had called earlier that day. "Sorry, honey," Sarah said. "Leo's passing the bar exam results today. It's a big moment." Elias stood alone in his graduation robe long after the ceremony ended, clutching his diploma, surrounded by strangers celebrating with their families. And that night, while he sat alone eating cheap takeout in his car, the sentence finally escaped his lips. Quiet. Barely louder than a whisper. "I tried my best, but I was never the child you were proud of." The words hung in the air like a confession no one would ever hear. 3 weeks later, the Miller house hosted another celebration. Leo had officially passed the bar. Markus rented decorations. Sarah cooked for 2 days straight. They even hired a small catering service. The party cost nearly 3 months of Elias's rent. But Markus didn't see the irony. Leo arrived wearing a tailored suit. People congratulated him, shook his hand, praised his future. Markus stood proudly beside him, introducing him to everyone. "This is my son, the lawyer." Elias stood in the background, refilling drinks, carrying trays, cleaning plates. At one point, Leo clapped him on the shoulder. "Still working hard, huh?" Elias forced a smile. "Someone has to." Leo laughed. Not cruelly, just casually. Because he had never noticed the difference between them. Later that night, Elias stepped outside for air. The party noise spilled through the windows behind him. Music. Laughter. Glasses clinking. He looked back through the living room window. His parents stood beside Leo. Smiling. Laughing. Proud. They looked like the perfect family. A picture frame come to life. Elias watched them for a long time. Then he whispered to the glass. "I tried my best, but I was never the child you were proud of." The reflection of the party lights blurred in his eyes. He wiped them quickly, and walked away before anyone could see. That winter something began to change inside Elias. Not anger. Not hatred. Something quieter. Determination. Every night after work, he began studying again. But this time, he didn't just study for classes. He studied for himself. Financial law. Forensic accounting. Fraud investigation. The subjects fascinated him. How money moved. How people hid it. How lies could be uncovered through numbers. Sometimes he studied until sunrise. Then he went to work again. No one knew. No one asked. Elias had spent his whole life being invisible. Now he used that invisibility as a weapon. One night at the scrapyard, Elias found something strange. An old ledger hidden in a locked drawer. Inside were payment records, cash transactions, unreported wages, names, amounts, and then something that made his stomach twist. His own name. Next to it, a number much larger than what he had been paid. Elias flipped through the pages. There were dozens of entries, each showing that Mr. Thorne had paid Markus extra money, kickbacks, for Elias's labor. 4 years. Markus hadn't been teaching him work ethic. Markus had been selling his son's labor, using the money to fund Leo's tutors, Leo's caps, Leo's future. Elias closed the ledger slowly. For a long time he just stood there. The machines hummed around him. Metal clanged in the distance. But inside his chest something cold settled into place. A realization. The favoritism wasn't accidental. It was profitable. That night Elias went home and opened his laptop. He began documenting everything. The ledger. The transactions. The payments. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving the truth. He was recording it. Studying it. Understanding it. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet thought formed. If numbers could reveal lies, then maybe one day they could reveal something bigger. Something no one could ignore. Far away in another city, Leo Miller had just begun his career as a lawyer. His future looked perfect. Successful. Respected. Admired. Markus and Sarah bragged about him constantly. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the golden boy had started making small adjustments to client funds. Tiny amounts. Barely noticeable. Just enough to cover gambling debts. Just enough to maintain the lifestyle he had always been promised. Leo believed he could control it. He believed he was too smart to get caught. And he believed his family would always stand behind him. But somewhere, quietly, patiently, a different kind of investment had begun. An investment built from long nights, silent pain, and a mind trained to follow money wherever it tried to hide. And its name was Elias. Success, like love, can be a dangerous illusion when it is handed to someone who has never learned how to earn it. For Leo Miller, success arrived early. Too early. And far too easily. For years, the world had told him the same story his parents had always told him. You are special. You deserve more. You will never fail. But success built on constant praise is like a house built on sand. It looks strong, until the first storm arrives. Leo's new life as a lawyer looked exactly like the life Markus had always imagined for him. A high-rise office. Expensive suits. Dinners with wealthy clients. He moved into a sleek apartment overlooking the city skyline. Every weekend he called home. Sarah always cried when she heard his voice. My son the lawyer, she would say proudly. Markus would tell everyone in the neighborhood. That boy made it. Meanwhile, Elias was still working nights. Still invisible. Still forgotten. But he was no longer the same boy who had stood outside that window years earlier. Because while Leo was celebrating success, Elias had begun learning how success could be faked. Leo's problem began quietly. Like most problems that destroy people. A co-worker invited him to a poker night. Just harmless fun. A few drinks. A few cards. Leo lost $500. He laughed it off. Then he returned the next week. Lost again. Then he started going to private games. Higher stakes. Riskier players. Within 6 months, Leo owed thousands. But Leo had never experienced consequences before. So instead of stopping, he improvised. As a junior lawyer, Leo handled escrow accounts, client deposits, temporary holding funds, money that moved quickly through the firm. One afternoon, staring at a spreadsheet, Leo had an idea. If he borrowed a small amount, just for a few days, no one would notice. He moved $3,000. Won $5,000 at the table. Replaced the money. Easy. The system worked. Too well. Soon he was moving 10,000, 20,000, then 50,000. He told himself the same lie every gambler believes. I'll win it back. But gamblers rarely win back what they lose. They only lose more. At first Leo hid his problem well. But money leaves trails. And numbers always remember. The firm began noticing discrepancies. Minor ones. Small delays in escrow transfers. Leo always had an explanation. Technical errors. Bank delays. Accounting mistakes. The partners believed him. After all, Leo Miller came from a good family. His father was a respected businessman. His mother was beloved in their community. And Leo himself carried an air of confidence that made people trust him instantly. No one questioned the golden boy. While Leo's lies grew larger, Elias's world had quietly transformed. Years of studying financial records had sharpened his mind. Numbers spoke to him the way music speaks to musicians. Patterns, movement, hidden connections. After leaving the warehouse, Elias eventually found work with a small investigative accounting firm. The job wasn't glamorous. Most of the cases involved small fraud investigations. But Elias was exceptional. He noticed things others missed. Unusual transfers, hidden shell companies, subtle laundering patterns. Within 5 years, he had built a reputation among investigators. Quiet, brilliant, relentless. But Elias never talked about his family. And he never mentioned his brother. One night, Elias was reviewing a financial investigation involving corporate escrow accounts. Something about the pattern looked familiar. Small withdrawals, irregular replacements, temporary borrowing. It was a classic fraud technique. But the location of the transactions caught his attention. The law firm handling the accounts had a name he recognized. Miller & Drake. Leo's firm. Elias stared at the screen for a long time. His first instinct was denial. Not Leo. But the numbers didn't lie. So he did what he always did. He followed the money. Over the next few weeks, Elias quietly dug deeper. The pattern was unmistakable. Leo wasn't just borrowing money. He was gambling with it. Client funds. Trust accounts. Millions slowly moving through hidden debts. Elias leaned back in his chair late one night. The office lights were dim. Rain tapped softly against the window. His brother, the golden child, the family investment, was a criminal. For a moment, Elias felt something he hadn't expected. Sadness. Not anger. Just a quiet understanding. Leo had been raised to believe he deserved everything. And when reality demanded effort instead, he had chosen shortcuts. Elias could have reported the evidence immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he began documenting everything. Carefully, patiently, building a case stronger than steel. Because this wasn't just about Leo. It was about the system that had created him. The favoritism. The lies. The years Elias had spent being treated like disposable labor. For the first time in his life, Elias had power. And he intended to use it wisely. Back in the city, Leo's gambling debts had grown terrifying. Hundreds of thousands. The people he owed weren't patient investors. They were dangerous men. One night, Leo received a phone call. A calm voice spoke on the other end. "You're running out of time." Leo wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm working on it." "You have 2 weeks." The line went dead. Leo stared at his bank accounts. There wasn't enough money. Not even close. So Leo made the worst decision of his life. He used his parents' retirement accounts as collateral for a private loan. Markus and Sarah never knew. They trusted him completely. The golden child could never betray them. Meanwhile, Elias had already discovered the loan. And the collateral. He stared at the documents in silence. Leo hadn't just stolen from clients. He had stolen from his own parents. The parents who had sacrificed everything for him. Even Elias. For a moment, Elias felt a strange ache in his chest. Not sympathy for Leo, but a bitter realization. They had chosen Leo every time. And now Leo was the one destroying them. The first anonymous tip arrived at the Financial Crimes Division on a quiet Tuesday morning. Then another. Then another. Each containing precise information. Transaction records. Account numbers. Wire transfers. Every piece of evidence perfectly organized. Investigators were stunned. Whoever was sending the information knew exactly what they were doing. One detective said something that would later become famous in the case. "This isn't a whistleblower. This is a professional." That same week, Leo called his parents. His voice sounded strained. "I might need some help," he said carefully. Markus immediately grew concerned. "What kind of help?" "Just temporary financial support." Markus didn't hesitate. "Of course. You're our son." Sarah agreed. "We'll always stand by you." Neither of them called Elias. They never did. 3 days later, federal investigators walked into Leo's office. They carried warrants, financial records, and evidence that left no room for denial. Leo tried to stay calm. But when they showed him the documents, his face turned pale. They knew everything. The transfers, the debts, the loan against his parents' retirement funds. Every hidden lie exposed. One of the agents asked the question that changed everything. "Who helped you hide this?" Leo shook his head desperately. "No one." But the agent wasn't asking about accomplices. He was asking about something else. Because whoever had uncovered this crime had been watching Leo for years. That evening Markus called Elias. It was the first time in months. His voice trembled. "Your brother is in trouble." Elias listened silently. Markus continued. "They're accusing him of fraud. But it must be a mistake." Elias said nothing. "We need your help," Markus pleaded. "You have connections now, right? Maybe you can talk to someone." Elias closed his eyes. For a moment he saw his childhood again. The scrap yard. The empty graduation seat. The painting under his bed. Then he spoke quietly. "I'll come." Markus sighed with relief. "Thank you, son." But Markus didn't understand something important. Elias wasn't coming to save Leo. He was coming to finish something he had started 15 years earlier. The media exploded with headlines. Rising lawyer accused of millions in fraud. Markus and Sarah were devastated. They couldn't understand how their perfect son had fallen so far. They believed someone must have framed him. They believed justice would clear his name. And deep down, they still believed Elias would help fix everything. But Elias had already chosen his role in the story. He wasn't the forgotten child anymore. He was the one who knew the truth. And very soon, the entire world would know it too. The courthouse stood tall in the center of the city, its stone pillars rising like silent witnesses to the endless parade of human mistakes. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was thick with whispers. Journalists filled the back rows. Law students leaned forward eagerly. Local residents sat quietly, curious about the scandal that had shaken the legal community. At the center of it all sat Leo Miller, the golden boy, the once promising lawyer. Now dressed not in power, but in desperation. His suit was still expensive. His hair was still neatly combed. But the confidence that once surrounded him had vanished. In its place was something fragile. Fear. Markus and Sarah Miller sat in the very last row of the courtroom. Sarah held a tissue tightly in her hands. Her shoulders trembled with quiet sobs. Markus stared forward, his face pale and rigid. For years he had spoken about Leo with pride. Now strangers whispered about his son with disgust. Fraud. Millions stolen. Clients ruined. Markus couldn't accept it. Not his son. Not the boy he had raised to be great. Somewhere inside his mind he kept repeating the same sentence over and over. This must be a mistake. And if it wasn't, then someone must have betrayed Leo. Markus's eyes scanned the courtroom. Then he saw a familiar figure standing near the doorway. Elias. For a brief moment relief washed over him. His other son had come. Maybe Elias would help fix this. Maybe Elias would speak to the investigators. Maybe Elias would save his brother. Markus gestured toward him. Elias. But Elias didn't respond. He simply stood quietly near the door, watching, waiting. The judge entered. The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor stood and began presenting the case. Your Honor, the defendant, Leo Miller, systematically stole funds from multiple client escrow accounts over a period of 8 years. Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor continued. These funds were used to finance personal gambling debts and luxury expenses. Leo's lawyer stood to object. Allegations without proof. The prosecutor smiled slightly. Oh, we have proof. He placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were financial records, transfer logs, bank statements, wire documents. Every piece of evidence meticulously organized. But something about the evidence puzzled the courtroom. It was too precise, too detailed. Almost as if someone had been documenting Leo's crimes from the very beginning. The judge leaned forward. Where did this information come from? The prosecutor glanced toward the lead investigator sitting nearby. Detective Alvarez will explain. Detective Daniel Alvarez took the stand. He was calm, professional, unemotional. The prosecutor asked the first question. Detective, how did you uncover a fraud operation this sophisticated? Alvarez paused. Then he said something that made the courtroom lean closer. We didn't uncover it. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Alvarez looked toward the back of the room. It was handed to us. Whispers spread instantly. The prosecutor continued. Handed to you by whom? Alvarez answered carefully. By a private consultant who has been tracking these financial movements for over 15 years. Markus frowned. 15 years? That was impossible. Leo hadn't even been practicing law that long. The prosecutor asked the final question. Is this consultant present in the courtroom today? Alvarez nodded. Yes. The judge looked around. Who is it? Alvarez slowly raised his hand and pointed toward the doorway. Mr. Elias Miller. Every head in the courtroom turned. Elias stepped forward. But the man walking toward the witness stand wasn't the boy Markus and Sarah remembered. Gone was the tired warehouse uniform. Gone were the worn-out work boots. Elias wore a tailored suit. Dark gray. Perfectly fitted. He carried himself with quiet confidence. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Markus felt his heart stutter. Sarah whispered through tears. Elias? They had never seen him like this before. The prosecutor spoke carefully. Mr. Miller, can you explain your involvement in this investigation? Elias nodded. For a moment he looked at his brother. Leo stared back in shock. Then Elias spoke. For the past 15 years, I have worked in forensic accounting and financial crime investigation. The room murmured. Elias continued. During a routine analysis several years ago, I noticed suspicious patterns in the financial transfers associated with Mr. Miller's law firm. He paused slightly. Leo Miller's firm. Leo's face drained of color. The prosecutor asked quietly. So you began tracking the transactions? Yes. And what did you discover? Elias answered calmly. A long-term fraud scheme involving escrow manipulation, gambling debts, and collateralized loans taken against family assets. Markus gripped the bench. Family assets? Sarah began shaking. The prosecutor placed one last document on the table. Is this the financial trail you assembled? Elias glanced at it. Yes. And does it prove that Leo Miller knowingly stole client funds? Elias nodded. It does. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Leo slammed his hand against the table. Elias, what the hell are you doing? The judge banged the gavel. Order. But the damage had already been done. The golden boy had just been exposed by the brother everyone had forgotten. During a recess, Markus and Sarah rushed into the courthouse hallway. They found Elias standing quietly near a window. Markus grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Sarah's voice cracked. He's your brother. Markus's anger grew louder. We did everything for you boys. For a moment Elias simply stared at them. Then he spoke. No. His voice was calm. You did everything for him. The words struck like a hammer. Markus shook his head. That's not true. Elias looked directly into his father's eyes. You used me to fund his life. Silence filled the hallway. Then Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old photograph. A faded painting. Markus frowned. What is that? Elias held it carefully. A painting I made when I was 12. Sarah gasped softly. It was the portrait of her. The one she had barely looked at. Elias continued speaking quietly. Do you remember the scrap yard you forced me to work at when I was 16? Markus stiffened. The one owned by your friend, Mr. Thorne. Markus said nothing. Elias's voice remained steady. I found his ledger. Markus's face went pale. Elias continued. I saw the payments. Sarah looked confused. What payments? Elias answered softly. Kickbacks. He looked at Markus again. You weren't teaching me work ethic. The words landed like a blade. You were selling my childhood labor. Markus stepped back as if struck. That's not. You took the extra money Mr. Thorne paid for my work. Elias's eyes never left him. And you used it to pay for Leo's tutors. Sarah covered her mouth. No. Markus tried to regain control. You turned your brother in because you hate him. Elias shook his head slowly. I didn't catch Leo because I hate him. He looked toward the courtroom doors. I caught him because he was using your retirement accounts as collateral for his debts. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. What? Elias spoke the final truth. You favored him so much that you gave him everything. He paused. And he stole the rest. The hallway was silent. Markus looked broken. Sarah wept quietly. Elias placed the old painting on the bench beside them. You weren't proud of me because I was the help. Then he turned toward the courtroom. But the help? He looked back one last time. Is the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. Elias walked back inside. The trial resumed. And for the first time in his life, the entire room was watching him. Not Leo. Not Markus. Not Sarah. Him. The child who had never been the favorite. And yet somehow, the only one who had become strong enough to face the truth. The courtroom was silent. Not the usual hush of anticipation or decorum, but a silence heavy with the weight of years, secrets, and betrayal. Elias stood tall, the calm eye in a storm of truth. The evidence was irrefutable. Every ledger, every wire transfer, every hidden movement of money was laid bare before the judge, the jury, and, most importantly, Leo Miller himself. The golden boy who had always believed the world would bend to him was now trapped in the glare of the facts he could no longer manipulate. When the verdict was read, it was concise, brutal, and public. Guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of client funds. Sentencing to follow. Leo's face drained of color. His hands trembled. He looked toward his parents, searching for the familiar reassurance that had sustained him all his life. But Markus and Sarah's faces told a different story. Shock. Regret. Desperation. And in the back of the courtroom, Elias, calm, composed, free from the years of invisibility, watched quietly. 4 years, he had lived in the shadows, building a life, building a skill set, building the patience needed to confront this moment. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt completion. Outside the courtroom, Markus and Sarah walked to a tiny cafe, their hands shaking, their faces hollow. Markus muttered repeatedly, "We did everything for him." Sarah shook her head, tears streaking her face. "Everything, for Leo. And we never saw him. Not really." The realization hit them like a tidal wave. Every choice, every favor, every ounce of attention had been given to the son they loved the most, while the other had silently carried the weight of the family, unnoticed, unpraised, unacknowledged. They had created the golden boy. And destroyed themselves in the process. Meanwhile, Elias packed a small bag in a quiet apartment across the ocean. He had moved to a city where no one knew him as the kid who wasn't good enough. He had built a life on his own terms. A career as a top forensic accountant and investigator. Friends who valued him for who he was, not for how he compared to a sibling. A home where respect and dignity were not earned through favoritism but through effort and integrity. He had long forgiven himself for the years of silence, the hidden pain, and the lack of love from those who should have been his guardians. But forgiveness for his parents? That was unnecessary. The last he heard from them was a voicemail, pleading for reconciliation. He didn't return the call. Weeks later, news reports followed Leo's sentencing. Headlines screamed about the golden boy lawyer who defrauded clients and family. The world knew his name. But one truth remained hidden from the world, preserved only in Elias' memory. Every step of Leo's fraudulent career had been traced and contained by the one the family had always overlooked, the son they had treated as a shadow, a servant, a ghost in the hallway. And Elias had done it not for revenge, but because the world had to see the truth. Because honesty mattered. Because, finally, he could be free. The final scene of Elias' story takes place at sunset. He stands on a balcony overlooking a city he has grown to love. The warm glow of the sun reflects off glass buildings. The breeze ruffles his hair. For the first time in decades, he feels no obligation. No comparison. No need to prove himself to anyone. A deep, quiet smile touches his lips. He remembers the painting of his mother from his childhood. He still keeps it tucked away in a drawer. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that he existed, that he mattered, and that the boy who had been invisible was finally seen, not by his family, but by the world. He whispers to the wind, not for anyone else to hear. I tried my best, and I survived. I am free. For Elias, the chains of favoritism, neglect, and unsaid pain have finally been broken.